And with me now, our regular weekly panel, Graham Morrison, Bruce Hawker. Gentlemen, Bruce, first to you. This really interesting situation we've got in the country right now, not that far away, Bruce, from the next federal election, and different jurisdictions in various states of lockdown, reopening plans at different stages, and now, unfortunately, a few cases in Brisbane. Hopefully they can get on top of that. But it's a very unpredictable scenario, isn't it? Can you remember anything like this?
No, not in my lifetime. And that's a real problem for Scott Morrison, of course, going into this election. What is the lay of the land going to be? Politicians, prime ministers particularly, want to have a very predictable environment with which to deal with, which to plan around. And with COVID, of course, he can't even dictate when borders are going to be opened. That'll be all left up to states, some of which aren't particularly sympathetic to him, probably none of which are particularly sympathetic to him. So that's a real problem for him. My gut feeling is that for various reasons, he's going to try to wait some time to see how things settle down. Not least of which would be because he hasn't sorted out the problems with climate change and the National Party, a big issue for people in inner city Liberal-held seats around the country.
The good news, though, Graham, is that we're seeing the momentum build on vaccines. Today, the ACT has passed the United Kingdom in terms of first doses. We saw New South Wales past Italy in the upwards of 86%. Victoria nudging up close, if not passing the United States. So our vaccine rates are surging despite a problematic start, Graham Morris.
Well, that's right. When you think about it, it's not all that long ago somebody would have said, look, if you can get 90% or 80% of Australians to do something, good luck. And blow me down, we've nearly got there. It's actually interesting around the country. I agree with you. It makes the political climate a bit unpredictable. But strangely, if you look around the country at the moment, if an election was held on Saturday, Victoria and Western Australia, the government was down a bit. In New South Wales holding, and in Queensland holding, in South Australia much the same. So it is patchy everywhere, and that's obviously why we're not having an election now.
Bruce, would you agree with that assessment in terms of the outlook? I would have thought New South Wales might be a little bit more of a concern. What's your take? What's your read on it?
Well, in New South Wales, there's been a real problem in Sydney for the New South Wales government about an us and them attitude which has developed between Western Sydney and the wealthier suburbs to the east and north. If that flows on to voting intentions regarding Morrison, then that becomes a problem for the government. So it's not an easy fix for them. Also, we know that in the coming weeks, we are going to open up in New South Wales, and that will invariably mean that there will be a significant spike in the number of hospitalisations and hopefully not deaths, but certainly hospitalisations, which the government will have to deal with here. And that will create further instability and uncertainty, certainly for the New South Wales government, but I could see that flowing onto Morrison himself. I think he's got a lot of problems going down that he's having to look at right now. And as I said before, he also has to worry about seats like North Sydney, Wentworth, and in Victoria, Kooyong. These seats which are socially progressive, fiscally conservative, but which will vote for an independent, as they've shown that they will, if they don't like the policies of the government of the day. We know, for example, that climate change, not talking about COVID here, but climate change is a massive issue for people in those electorates, and particularly women. And so he's got a lot of issues that he's got to try to juggle at the moment, balancing that against, a very hostile reaction from people inside the National Party caucus as well. Yeah. He's got a lot of bushfires he's got to put out.
And obviously off the back of that visit to the United States, Graham, the Prime Minister's got that pressure from some moderate Liberals in the cities. like as Bruce said there, I mean, he's not making that up. I mean, we saw that in Warringah. We saw that in a real life example of how that unfolded in Warringah at the recent election. And there's people with some deep pockets, Graham, who are backing these independents as well.
Yeah, look, he's got to be Solomon. He's got to, and this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to come up with a plan which he'll announce at some stage, and you'll have the farmers and the miners sort of on one side of the road, small business and most of Australia on the other side of the road, and you've had Anthony Albanese and a few of his rat bags with the fairies down at the bottom of the garden in the back paddock. But this Prime Minister is never going to say to the farmers, walk away from your animals, walk off your farms. He's never going to say to the miners, walk away from your jobs and, entire districts can die. Prime Minister is going to come up with a plan. It obviously has to be workable. You don't have to convince everybody because, we met the Kyoto targets, we met the Paris targets, and that's still not good enough for some people. So just wipe all the charlatans and the rat bags out. You've just got to come up with something for Middle Australia that looks as if, he's got it right. We can have this mix and match where we don't have to kill our own country and our own people.
Bruce, there is this situation at the moment where Bridget McKenzie and other Nats, but Bridget McKenzie today in the Australian Financial Review, having a dig at one of her fellow cabinet ministers in a way, and mentioning it's easy for people in seats like Kooyong to be preaching net zero. This is a fellow cabinet minister. We've seen this situation before where the Nats have been allowed, given a bit of a room to move, so to speak, in their constituency to make their case. But cabinet minister v cabinet minister is it's an unusual one, to say the least.
Indeed. So much for cabinet solidarity. I mean, this is the new normal to some extent. We're seeing it in New South Wales a lot with Barilaro attacking fellow government ministers and vice versa. At the end of the day, it doesn't look good because it looks like they're divided. But it just goes to the point that we're discussing here. This is not an easy fix. It's not. Graham sounds a little bit glib, I've got to say, when he says it's just a matter of doing a bit of this and a bit of that. People in these electorates that we're talking about, Frydenberg's electorate, Kooyong, aren't going to be easily put off. They've seen the evidence, and they've made up their minds that climate change is something that has to be dealt with. Now we've got the Glasgow conference coming up as well in November, which he may try to get out of going to, which would be an arch act of gutlessness, really. And so he's got more problems than the early settlers right now. That's my view.
I've got to wrap it, unfortunately.